classes. One thing I forgot this morning. On my right is Dr. Riham Bahi, who's currently an assistant professor at Cairo University in the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, and a visiting assistant professor at the American University of Cairo. Dr. Bahi received her PhD in International and Public Affairs from Northeastern University in Boston, and she serves as the dialogue coordinator at the Center for Civilization Studies and the Dialogue of Cultures. Her particular research interests include Islamic feminism, the global and transnational aspects of political Islam and U.S. relations with the Muslim world. And she will talk about Arab Spring in particular and what's been happening in Egypt, to give you just a snapshot. And basically, just to summarize her argument, she argues that while women may have sustained the Arab Spring, women were a very important part of the Arab Spring, it remains to be seen if the Arab Spring will sustain women. So she's got a sort of stay tuned message, hopefully. And Jennifer Pendelton, on my left, is the executive director of the Women's Learning Partnership, WLP, where she coordinates leadership and joint advocacy programs with women's rights organizations from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. Her work has focused specifically on empowering women to bridge the grassroots to national and international human rights advocacy. Jennifer holds a JD from Harvard Law School and a BA in Public Policy Studies from Duke University. She was previously living in Morocco and also in sub-Saharan Africa, has been involved in projects that include gender and small business development and community-based organizing for healthcare access from impoverished urban migrants in Ghana, and promoting improved post-conflict legal responses to gender-based violence during the Rwandan genocide. So Riham is going to bring in an Egyptian perspective, and as somebody who witnessed the Arab Spring, and we're hoping that we'll also hear a lot about sort of on-the-ground action and what's been happening, particularly from Gender For, like what are things that activists are actually doing in the Muslim world, and how are they trying to make a difference. All right, so without further ado, let me ask, I'll just leave this here. I'm going to ask Riham to start by giving us a little bit of background on Egypt, to sort of lay out the background, because some of you may not know that much about Egypt. So why don't you start telling us who the main political actors are, what kind of government was in place in Egypt until Arab Spring?
Okay. How are you?
Great, how are you?
You still awake?
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about Arab Spring, or talk about Egypt in particular. And of course, I'm going to focus the discussion on Egyptian women and what opportunities the Egyptian revolution provided for women or not. We'll see that. But in terms of the forces that were and are in Egypt during the previous regime, and still actually during or after the revolution, we had this clash between the Mubarak secular regime. Mubarak is the president of Egypt. I don't know how much you know about Egypt, so I'm going to clarify everything I say. So we had this clash between a Mubarak secular regime and the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Islamic trend. And now, after the revolution, we have the same dichotomy and the same clash between liberal, secular. This is a camp by itself. It's called the Kutla al-Masriya, running for election as a bloc. And also the Islamic, or the Islamist trend, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the other Salafi or Islamist parties. It's called the Democratic Coalition. And there's a clash between the two, the liberal trend and the Islamic trend. When it comes to women, we have the same clash and the same dichotomy between Islamic feminists and secular feminists. And these two trends, they are different in terms of their frame of reference, or the dichotomy emanates from the differences in their frame of reference, and of course methodology, and of course outcome. So they argue, what should be the frame of reference? Is it the universal standards, the international treaties when it comes to women, or we have to go back to the Quran? Both of them, they claim that patriarchally interpreted Islamic laws are responsible for the oppressive Muslim practices against women. But they adopt different approaches. Secular feminists dismiss and reject any role for the Quran or for religion in the liberation of women. And they claim that Sharia is not compatible with equality. And if we do engage religion, this means that we are silencing secular forces and we are legitimizing religious argument. And Islam is based on gender hierarchy and cannot be adopted as a framework for gender equality. And instead of focusing on Islam, let's focus on real problems facing women like socio-economic and political barriers to gender justice. On the other hand, we have Islamic reformists. Their approach is different. They don't dismiss religion, but they want to reform and renew the religious discourse. They understand that women activism now exists in a different context. This context has been highly Islamized. And they use the Quran, or actually they see that the Quran has been used to justify the mistreatment of women, and therefore it is necessary to engage with it and articulate a new discourse for gender justice. So it's not enough to criticize, but they have also to, not enough to criticize the traditional discourse, but they have to articulate a new discourse for gender justice, and mainly because Islamists have already succeeded in Islamizing the terms of reference of the public discourse in the Egyptian society. And they successfully did that under the Mubarak regime in terms of, there's this famous law called Qanun al-Khula, which gave women the right to initiate divorce. They used religious argument to back this, and they succeeded in giving it a justification. So these kind of Islamic women, they're trying to find a route towards modernity, but modernity that is rooted in the culture, and use the public role of religion for social changes. So these are the two forces shaping gender issues in Egypt right now.
Let me switch. I wanted Jennifer to give a little bit, I mean, we're sort of, in the beginning, we're sort of talking about apples and oranges, but we're going to start to converge towards some common themes. So Jennifer's not going to talk about a country, she's going to talk about an organization, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about what WLP does and their role in a number of Muslim countries. So we'll start her off with that question.
So WLP is Women's Learning Partnership. We are a partnership of organizations from 20 different countries in the global south, primarily Muslim majority countries. And just to reiterate what's already been said today, we're not talking about a single culture or a single context. We have partners in Sub-Saharan and North Africa, in the Middle East, South, Southeast, and Central Asia. So each of them bring a different approach to the work, a different set of challenges and issues, even though all are working within this common religious framework. We work in 4 major program areas in our interactions with our partners. We work jointly to create curriculum and grassroots trainings on participatory leadership, women's political participation. Now we're working on materials on social and economic rights for women, violence against women, and advocacy. A major basis of our work is South-South exchange. WLP, the offices in Washington, D.C. have just 8 people, and we're basically a liaison staff. So we work to bring our partners together to find out from them what's going on, to find out what their common issues and concerns are, so that we can facilitate their exchange. We focus substantially on capacity building both of our partner organizations, which are all autonomous organizations, as well as working with them to help build the capacity of other women's rights groups in their countries and networks. We work also with our partners in developing the leadership curriculum, which is in 20 languages, so that it reflects the local culture and needs. We don't just pick up a manual in English and translate it directly. There are a lot of nuances. I'm no linguist, but any of you who are bilingual, who are interested in linguistics, know that there are a lot of complex terms, and sometimes not so complex terms don't carry over from one language to another. So we really want to make sure that the work that we produce is going to actually make sense and reflect our value set. That's really important when taking the programs back to the grassroots level, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. Just to make sure that it is locally rooted and locally owned. We work on multiple levels, not only at the grassroots, but with national and international women's rights advocacy, and trying to bridge those connections. So we have several major advocacy campaigns centered around women's rights issues that aren't necessarily salient at the grassroots level. We try to make them meaningful there, but at the strategic level and the NGO capacity building level, we work first on the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. As some of you probably know, it has been ratified by all but 6 countries, including the US. And in the Middle East, everyone has ratified it except for Iran. However, where it has been ratified in the Middle East, most countries have reservations to CEDAW and certain provisions with which they take issue or feel as though it's not consistent with their national laws or value sets. So we have a campaign to eliminate those reservations in the region. Our most recent success there has been in Morocco, which after a process of a couple of years from the time the king announced the reservations would be lifted and trying to figure out exactly what the legal process would be to achieve that, that has officially happened now. However, that is a complicated area to work in. People don't understand CEDAW and what it means in daily lives. So another campaign that is closely connected, has a lot of the same activists working together frequently, is on citizenship rights for women. It's a major issue in the region, as well as in some other regions in which we work, that women who are married to non-nationals are not able to afford the same rights and entitlements of citizenship to their children or spouses. That's loaded with a lot of complicated refugee and political issues as well, but it plays out in a clear socioeconomic level that makes it easier to discuss. So even though it's actually Article 9 of CEDAW addresses this, it's an area that most Western women's rights activists don't know an awful lot about, but it has been an area that has been easier to mobilize around because it hits closer to home with a lot of the women that we're working with in the region. 2 other women's rights campaign areas that we work on are violence against women and family law reform. These happen less at an international coalition level. Each country has a different set of issues and that they need to advocate for at a national level. But again, that's where we try to support strategic exchange to help find what best practices have been in communicating what has worked, how to lobby effectively with local governments, how to raise public awareness and gain support. So we've worked with our partners to document some of the best practices. Through our translation series, our partner in Morocco had documented a comprehensive set of means by which to advocate for family law reform. So we translated that into English and then into Persian, which was used by some of the activists that we work with in Iran. So we're working across levels. We're trying to bring what's happening at that international level. Sometimes, and myself having a background in the law, tend to get caught up in the legal instruments a bit in my thinking and speaking, so I enjoy being able to talk with activists at the grassroots and get a little bit more grounded in how to make that connect locally.
All right, I'd like to ask Riham to give a little bit more background on Egypt now, and particularly if she can identify some roles that women have played in Egypt historically, and if there are some successes she can point to under Mubarak, things that she thinks have improved, and other.
Thank you. Okay, so Egypt is different from Saudi Arabia. To start with, under the Mubarak regime, women enjoyed several rights and achieved several successes. I'm going to share them with you. First of all, we had, of course, Egypt signed all the international treaties regarding human rights and international rights, and they were present to the world, the outside world, as good supporters for women's rights. We had also, or the government established the National Council for Women, and the purpose of that council was, to, of course, to support women on different levels, especially if they're running in elections. But it turned out to be that the National Council for Women was only supporting women of the ruling National Democratic Party, and they discriminated against any other women. For example, Jamila Ismail, she was running in elections in 2010, and of course Jamila is the wife of Ayman Noor, who ran previously against Mubarak in the presidential elections, and he ended up in prison. So, of course, she said that she received no assistance whatsoever from the National Council for Women. Also, under the Mubarak regime, they put in place a quota for women in the parliament. They added to our parliament 64 seats to be filled by women. All the seats were filled in the 2010 elections. All the seats were filled with women of the ruling party. And of course, the reason for the quota was not for the sake of women, but to show up the number of the ruling Democratic Party, especially after the successes of the Muslim Brotherhood in the parliamentary elections of 2005. Of course, under the Mubarak regime also there were, because Suzanne Mubarak was very much interested and active in promoting women's rights, there were some changes when it comes to family law. So under the Mubarak regime, women were given the right to initiate divorce. Women did not enjoy that right before. It was the men's privilege to grant divorce or give divorce, or the divorce unilaterally. Under the Mubarak regime, also, there were changes in the marriage contract that women can put any conditions they want in their marriage contract. So in my marriage contract, I put, for example, I have the right to work, I have the right to travel, my husband cannot marry anyone else but me. So things like that. So women can put any conditions they want in their marriage certificate. So certainly there were some changes when it comes to women's rights under the Mubarak regime, but that's not all.
And maybe we can get a better sense from Jennifer, what the grassroots organizations that you work with, these women, what kinds of activities are they involved in? Can you give us a little bit more of a background on these grassroots organizations in the various countries?
Sure. So our partner organizations actually each have a different agenda depending on where they're working and what their needs are. Some of them are squarely self-identified as human rights organizations. Some do a lot more work on women's economic empowerment, working with cooperatives, doing specific outreach on family law reform issues. A big piece of our joint programming is to try to reach women at the grassroots. All of our partner organizations do work at this level, and trying to really change social structures and understandings of women's roles and what their potentials are. We implement a leadership learning methodology that really encourages democratic participation and asks women to try to define leadership and then redefine leadership. Again, I think women's circumstances differ from country to country and even community to community, but we've talked, I think, on a lot of our breakout sessions about the public and private spaces and the fact that women are traditionally relegated to the private space in some form or another. So one of the first steps that we take with them is working to understand how maybe they already have taken leadership, even if only in very small ways and small steps, speaking out in their communities, and with that, make a first step towards enabling them to become more active participants in more formal decision-making mechanisms. So, for example, we might, through the course of a conversation and using different case studies and talking with women in these groups, have a woman realize that she stood up to her next-door neighbor who wasn't letting his daughter go to school. And that is a form of leadership. And just that little piece of empowerment is just a small step forward in trying to encourage broader steps towards participation. A big step in our workshops is, again, the practice of communication, the practice of democracy. We don't have a facilitator that just stands in front and talks at people, but it is a dialogue that goes on. We work with the women to identify common issues in their communities, and as they discover what their shared vision is, their common problems, many will develop advocacy campaigns or project ideas to support their communities. In some cases, these might just be in the abstract, a good exercise in creating things, but we often find that a lot of these projects are put into practice, and we've had some really great success stories. One of my favorite ones is in Morocco. We were working with a group of rural women who lived in what were collectively held lands, and for over a century, as the government was trying to buy back lands from the communities, only men were being compensated for it. So out of one leadership workshop to begin with, and this quickly grew, the women identified this as a significant problem they were facing, and they developed an advocacy campaign about that. Immediately started mobilizing to have sit-ins in front of the parliament, to conduct outreach, to implement additional trainings in their communities, so it quickly spread. And in the last 2.5 years now, they've actually been able to get ministerial declarations that are enforcing women now to have equal compensation for the land. So it's been thrilling to see that kind of outcome at a larger policy level, that it affects women's economic rights in a very tangible way. And then we also will have from workshops just as important, women just building community centers or conducting outreach with their women in their communities, and deciding, I really like this kind of conversation. I'm going to go have it, you know, in the next town over where my aunt lives. So on that level as well, it's been very exciting to see what emerges, and we're constantly surprised by the outcomes. I think we have a lot of ideas about what we might want to see happen, but usually the ownership of what takes place, and I failed to mention all the trainers are with our partner organizations, so